It's really sad right now watching the woke mob have their way with Warhammer 40k, and, of course, Games Workshop, instead of defending the long-term legacy fan base and defending the canon and integrity of their lore, which is decades long at this point, a foundation built upon since like the late 80s, it's just insane to me that the company, rather than honoring this very niche tradition of hardcore nerds who have spent thousands of pounds, thousands of dollars on this hobby over the years. You'd think that GW wouldn't be so quick to capitulate and with such enthusiasm to this insincere movement of political agitators. It really is fucking pathetic, because for OG Warhammer fans, myself included, it wasn't just about the models, there was like a culture of Warhammer. And back when I was a kid, me and my friends, we would go to the Games Workshop locally and we'd bring our models, which were very poorly painted compared to some of the veterans, right? These older dudes who were more than happy to take us under their wing. They teach us some of the basics of the tabletop game. They teach us painting techniques. And really, it was kind of about sharing that love of Warhammer, the property, with the younger generation. And that's kind of how it worked. There was a wholesomeness to it, despite the grimdark aesthetics of the game itself. And looking back now, I see the value in that kind of mentorship, that positive masculine space where you've got the younger guys and the older guys and they're just having a great time. And it's almost difficult to even comprehend by today's standards. In this day and age, young men getting together and having fun is considered aberrant. It's suspicious. It could be dangerous even. Which really shows you just how far the political wedge has been driven. Mass society has become so politicized that this kind of positive atmosphere, these spaces that foster camaraderie and community between young men, this is just not viable anymore. It's considered something deeply problematic by the woke status quo. Unlike back in my day when, regardless of your personal politics or identity, those doors to your local Games Workshop, they were always open and anybody could come in and share some of the joy of this classic British institution that is Warhammer, right? And it was like this for decades. Up until the last few years, where slowly but surely we have seen a form of infiltration take place. We've seen a lot of the employees of Games Workshop themselves expressing this far-left woke perspective, which is curiously shared by a new generation of woke Warhammer fans. They organize via social media, Reddit especially, and they've come in and demanded that the hobby be completely retooled to suit their values. And not only is this pressure coming from the bottom up, but we have executives at Games Workshop that seem eager to oblige. And I even heard a rumor that Amazon, who are planning on producing Henry Cavill's Warhammer 40k series, are so fixated on fulfilling their ESG commitments that not only are they going to force female Space Marines into the show, but they're actually pressuring Games Workshop to alter their lore to retcon female Space Marines into the Adeptus Custodes, right? Like the OG Space Marines in the lore. And if these supposed leaks are true, then Cavill has been protesting, he's threatening to walk. And many insiders within Games Workshop are not happy with this decision, and yet it's going to be forced through regardless. And obviously this has caused a lot of unrest within the Warhammer fan base, but you have community managers on Twitter that are banning people for expressing even the smallest amount of pushback. Well, sayonara, chuds. Warhammer is for everybody now, and your criticism is not legitimate. In fact, it really is just hate. And the wokies are sadistically celebrating this victory right now. This really is a big W for them in the ongoing culture war. Because, of course, what's happening to Warhammer right now, it's the same process that's happened to all of these legacy nerd subcultures, where they are infiltrated from the outside, the goodwill of the community, the openness, the political neutrality, the lack of gatekeeping is exploited and used against the fan base itself through this extremely tired yet effective neo-Marxist critique, where it's just a relentless fixation on bigotry, sexism, diversity. It's like these people are the true fans of Warhammer, even though they may not have even given a shit about the hobby until the last year or so. They're the true fans, and they're here to eradicate these toxic elements that Warhammer has apparently become infamous for after all these years. Coded fascism, racism, xenophobia, they're here to fix this problem, and anyone that doesn't appreciate this, anyone not willing to immediately roll over and let these people have what they want, which is total control over the culture of Warhammer, you yourself are clearly some form of bigot, and not only will your opinion be discarded, but you yourself are no longer welcome in this community at large. You are now on the outside, starting now and for forever. Because this hobby, although there's still a lot of work to be done, this hobby is now on the road to becoming politically correct. And it's curious to observe that a lot of the time, the woke critique starts with women. It always starts with a feminist critique, because I guess that's the most effective starting point. In terms of praxis, if you're like an insufferable communist and you want to take over some kind of culture that you view as being strategically valuable, in the spirit of neo-Marxism, start with female representation. That's how they destroyed video games. It was always about attacking the subculture for its inherent masculine qualities. It doesn't matter that women didn't build Warhammer, they didn't write the lore, they weren't really involved with the history of tabletop gaming in the UK. They have nothing to do with that. They never were interested at all. But despite this obvious fact, in the name of diversity, equality, and inclusion, we're being told that Games Workshop itself has to retcon their own lore so that we can have female space marines. And, the wokeists are acting like to even question this decision makes you some kind of sexist troglodyte bigot. Okay. Regardless of the fact that women are already represented in the 40k universe, in the Imperium, as an elite unit, i.e. the Sisters of Battle. At this point, we know that they know that Warhammer doesn't need female space marines. In the same way that none of our entertainment needs to have these arch-communist assholes parsing every single little bit of the culture to make sure it represents their values, which themselves are anti-values. They're like the antithesis of fairness, everyone having an individual experience with the property, people being able to make it their own. Anybody can come in. It's no, now, conveniently, the group that actually created Warhammer and built the hobby up to what it is now, oh, well, you're no longer wanted. In the same way that we don't want any young men, especially young white men, to have any kind of cultural power or institutional power. It's that we're going to be excluded from now everything. It's we're not even allowed to participate in our own subcultures that we created authentically. And let's be honest, how many women actually enjoy Warhammer for what it is, and they're not just showing off on TikTok or something or trying to bait horny nerds into subscribing to their OF? In before, hey, I'm a woman and I like Warhammer, so you're wrong and you're also a terrible person for even saying this. And it's okay. Let's try and grapple with the concept of per capita, because per capita, the average Warhammer 40k fan is not a woman, or a gay black guy, or a gender-fluid Latina. We're talking about a straight white male nerd subculture, on average. The fact of which is apparently highly problematic to a lot of these people, but nonetheless is simply just reality. Don't shoot the messenger here. I didn't create the world of inequality that exists. Neither did white Europeans either. We didn't create a world of inequality for all the minorities to live in and seethe 24/7 about. It's they're observing just natural hierarchy and differences in nature. And then through this god-awful Marxist dialectic, they're blaming Europeans and white people, specifically straight white men, for causing systemic inequality, even the systemic inequality observed in nature itself. This sounds a little bit kooky, guys. For that to be true, white people would actually have to be demigods of some kind. Talk about white supremacism. But my point is, their reasoning for all of this retardation falls apart under the most mild scrutiny. And really, at this point, anyone holding water for this idea of systemic racism and white supremacy and all that, whether you understand or not, you are advancing the Marxist position. You're advancing a worldview and a style of politics that is completely evil and wrong and irreflective of reality. So that's on you. That's not my fucking problem. but you guys are making it my problem. And you're making it my problem by ruining everything that I enjoy. And I have to reiterate here, I think people need to be rejecting the Marxist worldview and critique at its foundation. Because not only is it immoral, it is persecutory, it's anti-white, and it's worse in terms of sheer human misery. It has caused more suffering than any far-right ideology that you can even imagine. That is the truth, you know? More people were genocided in the Holodomor that took place in fucking Russia than the Holocaust. That might be news to you, but it's nonetheless history. And this type of dire outcome is really more of the rule than it is the exception. Which is why we actually don't have to listen to these wokeists. Like, have some fucking integrity. Games Workshop. These people are fucking evil. Why are we giving them what they want? Why do we capitulate to their demands with such glee-filled, self-loathing cockledry? You know, I think anybody who is still taking these woke arguments at face value, like, you need to wisen the fuck up. Opposing wokeism is in fact the morally correct position. And yet, infuriatingly, there's nobody standing up in Games Workshop and saying, excuse me, you freakazoid communists, like, you didn't build anything. You guys don't even like Warhammer. This community deserves better, you know, like, where is that voice of reason? It doesn't exist. And consequently, Games Workshop have officially stated that, okay, the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's Guard, the most hardcore, legendary Space Marines, contained women. And to even question this lore, which, by the way, the lore is completely wrong. Like, this is a retcon, despite the gaslighting coming from the official Twitter of Games Workshop. They're saying, well, there were always women custodies. It's like, nope, wrong. You know, it's really funny how these people, they love to edit history. It's like, Oceania was always at war with East Asia. Space Marines have always been men. It's part of the physical conditioning and process involved in becoming a Space Marine. It's excruciating, you know, you're bred from the gene seed of the Emperor's sons himself. The Primarchs, you know, their genetic material then forged into these super soldiers of unfathomable strength, you know, 8-foot-tall hulking behemoths of men. And, you know, it's like, okay, fine. This is the kind of universe that Warhammer is. In the same way that Roman centurions were men, and the soldiers of Sparta were men, you know, and the Greek myrmidons, the most ruthless warriors, were men. This is just called historical consistency. A little bit of archetypal realism, hyper-realism, you know. This is, of course, a very bombastic IP. You know, the regular infantry of the Imperium, the Imperial Guard, they view Space Marines as almost mythical creatures. And it's just the sheer awe of the Guardsmen as described in the extensive lore and novels. Their eyes widening, their jaws dropping when they see an ultramarine squad burning through the atmosphere, utterly fearless in this single-minded bloodlust of eradicating the enemy in the name of the God Emperor of mankind. You know, this property really does not lend itself well to wokeism. Because wokeism is fake and it's gay and lame, right? Whereas Warhammer is unfathomably based, hyper-masculine and awesome. And this explains why they really want to humiliate Warhammer fans. They want to humiliate us for ever liking the property as it originally existed. Warhammer 40k is now going to be gay and lame. Just like everything else. Everything under this cultural regime of wokeism that no one voted for, that no one even likes, you know, everything is going to be fake and gay and lame. And if you don't like that, that makes you a bad person, right? So this is the conversation happening right now on Twitter, where the Wokehammer loyalists, who they want Space Marines to have trans representation, they just want this property to be dragged down as far as possible. And for them, I mean, I'm not even sure that they care about Warhammer, but they do care about cultural subversion, this cultural war that they wage, where they take something beautiful that we created, they turn it inside out, and take a shit on it, you know, and then they're going to serve that back to us and go, you better enjoy this, Otherwise, you're a Nazi. So that's the level of the conversation that we're going to engage in here. It's we've ruined something that you love, and because you're upset, you're a Nazi. So that's pretty cringe. But you're also seeing on the pro-Warhammer side, a lot of these centrist eggheads shutting down all political discussion about this situation. It's like, oh, well, both sides are just as bad. Both sides. It's like horseshoe theory, you know? Oh, far right, far left, but I'm just gonna float above it. And it's like, you're a fucking pussy. Like, I can't stand these centrists. You know, one side is actively aggressive. One side is actively hostile. They're conducting a memicide that is prelude to an actual genocide where white people take the place of the Romanovs in like a global Bolshevik fucking witch hunt. And the other side is going, yeah, can you just leave us alone maybe? I mean, you know, so we can live our lives in peace and raise our children and, God forbid, maybe even partake in a little Warhammer 40k at the end of the working week? Maybe just leave us alone. And the centrists are like, no, both sides. It's like, fuck you.